Webinar, just a few housekeeping items, so I'll open it up after the end for questions. If you want to talk about a specific project, we'll be happy to do that. Just ask that you stay on mute for now, and then when we open it up for questions, you can either unmute or type a question into the chat, and we'll just a few of us here, so I think probably as we're going through, if you have a question that pops up as Brandon or I are talking, we'll be happy to answer that as we go as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the agenda, we'll just kind of start off with an overview of the program, talk about the eligible applicants. Most of you probably know who those are, how you submit an application, the scoring and the award process, and then follow up with a question and answer period. So I'll just start with this first slide. As you know, the Port Host Communities Revitalization Fund was created back in 2020 as kind of an offshoot of the IRF program that is designed to allow port host communities to help redevelop, bring new life into vacant, deteriorated structures that had some kind of relationship to your port, whether it's in the past or in the future potential. So we are pretty flexible in what we mean by kind of port related. So if you have a specific question about a project that's not necessarily in the port or at the port, but it's kind of near the port, we can talk about that. And over the last, since 2020, we've assisted 14 projects throughout these communities that have leveraged over $27 million in public and private investment and created more than 100 jobs. So now I'll turn it over to Brandon.
All right, so here are some of the key points of the Port Host program. Again, most of you are already kind of familiar with this, but for those that aren't, as mentioned, funding is available for the rehabilitation and revitalization of vacant commercial and industrial structures in port communities. Its aim is to spark revitalization by eliminating blight and stimulating the local economy. Port Host program can be administered as a grant or loan of up to $480,000, and one-to-one match is required for this program. Depending on your level of need, however, projects could receive additional funds, but that would kind of require some additional conversations with DHCD. Our awards are given annually, and we typically have applications open anytime from the late summer through the fall. This year's round of applications will be open from September to October 4th, and they will close at midnight on October 4th. Best practice is to have your application completed before that deadline. That way, state agency staff can review your application and get back to you with any questions or request clarity before that deadline approaches. And in terms of who can apply for the awards, it's open to local units of government, IDAs, or EDAs. Also, the unit of government can apply on behalf of a nonprofit or for-profit entity, and we'll kind of get into that distinction later. So here's our anticipated timeline for this year. As mentioned, we're going to open applications up on September 3rd and close them on October 4th. We hope to have our applications reviewed and projects recommended for award by winter of this year, or maybe early 2025. And then we'll look to have contract negotiations kick off in the spring of 2025. Keep in mind, your project should fit within an 18-month timeline for completion, so be mindful of that when you submit your projects. But also, we understand that we all have to kind of be flexible, and once our award recommendations are made, it has to go through a process going through PR and up to the governor's office, so that may add some time to that timeline. So that's why we just ask that you kind of have everything teed up and everything ready to go, and really clear, understandable timelines are critical to making sure that projects are successful. In terms of eligible properties, as Tori mentioned, we're intended to support the rehabilitation of vacant and deteriorated structures whose poor condition creates a sense of economic blight in the surrounding area and may also be a deterrent to future development. This means warehouses, manufacturing facilities, schools, shopping centers, hotels, and transportation centers, and others are all eligible. Be mindful that Port Host will not fund new construction or scattered site projects or greenfield development. If you have any questions about project's eligibility, feel free to reach out to us and we can kind of discuss that over the phone and make sure that you have a project that's eligible for an award. Port Host can be used for an array of activities, including acquisition, rehabilitation, repair, or demolition and clearance. Be mindful that funds cannot be used solely for acquisition or demolition unless there are other committed redevelopment funds going into that property, and there must be a market-based plan that outlines reuse options. In general, demolition should only be used when the size or location of that particular building precludes development potential or where there's an imminent safety threat. Also, remember that the true intent of port hosts is to offset hard construction costs. While acquisition is an allowable cost, keep the acquisition to 25% or less of the total requested amount is a good rule of thumb. Applications with acquisition requests above that threshold are less likely to be recommended for award. And also remember that grant administration is not an eligible activity for port host, and we'll discuss grant administration later. As mentioned before, only local units of government or IDAs and EDAs are eligible to apply. However, those units of government can apply on behalf of a for-profit or a nonprofit entity. Port host funds will be awarded as either grants or loans, depending on a few circumstances. In order for the award to be considered a grant, the property must be publicly owned, or the privately owned property has an option agreement or a contract in place for purchase by local government at the time of application. Also, the private property could be owned by a nonprofit organization, and that would qualify as a grant as well. If the property is owned by a private for-profit entity and the end use will be owned by a private for-profit business, then the Port Host Award will be considered a loan. Funds are dispersed to the unit of government who then loans the funds to the for-profit entity. And we'll discuss loan details in a minute. Your locality can only submit one application per funding round. You should strive to select the projects with the highest and best use, and be sure to only consider projects that are shovel ready. Your project should be under contract within 6 months of the award announcement, so having your capital stack secured and your development team ready to go are essential. Resolutions are required for any application requesting port host funds, and it should include the property address and intended amount to be requested. Should your project be awarded as a loan, we will work with you through contract negotiations. As mentioned, we disperse the funds to the unit of local government, who then administers that loan to the private entity. Our loans have an interest rate of 2.5% and an amortization schedule of 20 years. And in addition to the loan agreement between the locality and that private entity, DHCD will require a performance agreement with the developer. Again, port host awards require one-to-one match. This means for every dollar you request in port host funds, you will have to match it with funds from public or private sources. The match must be documented costs or cash that are directly associated with physical activities on site. Local match can include federal, state, local, or private funds spent on activities within the last full fiscal year, from July 1, 2023 to June 30th of 2024. Eligible match costs can be acquisition or soft costs such as engineering, design, or architectural costs, investments into machinery and tools, public fees, or inspection costs. We discussed grant administration earlier as not being an eligible activity. However, it can count as match, but no more than 5% of that local match will be accepted as in-kind or cash for out-of-pocket administrative costs. In terms of ineligible match, state or local taxes, remediation, interest payments, or investments into business, personal, or tangible property are not allowed. This includes furniture, fixtures, and some equipment. If you would like a more complete list of eligible and ineligible costs, feel free to email me or type that into the chat, and I can send you a one-pager with some typical costs after this webinar. In terms of our funding priorities, remember this is an economic development program. Our 5 main priorities are a relationship to a local or regional strategy, project readiness, projects with a clear end use, projects with a high degree of blight, and projects whose end use has a clear and significant impact. These priorities are not listed in any particular order, and we'll discuss application scoring on the next slide. After we receive and review all the applications, we score them as a team. We do involve other entities in our review as a way to ensure that all projects are viable and free from significant obstacles to completion. All projects are scored against a rubric, and in no case will applications scoring below 70% be recommended for an award. The strongest applications will be able to document that the project is shovel ready and could not be completed without port host funds. Some projects do carry more weight than others. Projects that act as a catalyst that spark additional investment and job creation in distressed areas are considered strongly. Due to the competitive nature of applications, any projects that cannot meet this criteria may score lower on an application. And another reminder that this round of applications does require one-to-one match, so be sure your capital stack is in place. Once you have your project identified and ready to go, you're ready for your application. Make sure your organization is already registered in CAMS. To do that, you'll need a UEI and an FEIN for your organization. And as mentioned before, applications are going to open on September 3rd and they're going to close October 4th. Remember to save each page as you work through CAMS. And it's also a good idea just to save every few minutes or so, just in case your application doesn't time out. Another reminder that state agency staff are here to support you with your application, but we will not be available after 5 p.m. on October 4th for any more technical assistance. Perhaps the most important section of your application is in the budget. Complete this section and define all of your eligible costs. Please report all funding sources and identify all the activities that need to be taken in order to complete the project. If there are costs that are not funded by Porthost, please list those activities under other funding. This helps give a complete idea of your capital stack. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to us and ask. This is the project summary sheet, which is a part of your application. It is a high-level report of that project. It includes some basic information such as the year built, the original use of the property, the size of the property, the owner, developer, and the total budget, and some other intended outcomes of the project. This is often our main source document when we review applications, so be sure that you report all information accurately here. There's a number of questions on your Porthost application, and one refers to the relationship between your project and the local or regional development plans. Be sure to discuss any local or regional plans that are relevant and that tie into your project, and also discuss or report any recent or upcoming investment that is either going to contribute to or benefit from your Porthost project. In terms of addressing blight and vacancy, please describe how this property was prioritized over others and also address how the blight is impeding other development. Discuss how the condition of the property has been a challenge and be sure to include as many photographs that depict the current condition of the property. We understand that blight and deterioration can be subjective. However, the more information and images you provide us will help us inform our decisions. In terms of project readiness, please list any investments or initiatives that have contributed to or will benefit from your project. Also report the status of all outside sources of funding. And when it comes to that, any outside sources, make sure you have those secured. And if they are not yet secured, then please give us a clear timetable of when you expect to have those funds in hand so that we can make sure that these projects are viable all the way through. In terms of project status, please complete, as part of the application, there's a project status chart. You're going to give a brief narrative about the ownership of the property and kind of what activities have been completed to date and any potential obstacles to completion. Again, remember that anything environmental or remediation is not eligible for Porthost, so you're going to give us an idea if those things have already occurred in the past and if some of those things might qualify for any of your match costs. Also, you're going to want to discuss site control. If you do not yet own the property, please give us a timeline of when that's going to be expected to be completed, and also give us an idea of any potential barriers such as zoning obstacles that might need to be addressed. In terms of project readiness and how it relates to other stakeholders, here you're going to want a list if a developer has already been identified. Please discuss their experience with these types of projects as well as their capacity. If local government is going to be the developer, please include that similar information. And if you have not identified a developer, please discuss your timeline for securing one. Here is an example of a match funding chart. Please complete this and make sure that all sources of funding have either been secured or defined. And also, please describe what they're going to be used for. This kind of helps us during application time to delineate exactly what port host funds are being used to cover and what other funds are being used to cover. And it really helps us inform project viability. We don't want to have anybody putting a lot of money or effort into a project that doesn't have their funding all the way secured. In terms of end use, please discuss the end use of your property, including evidence of its economic viability. This can be through market research, pro formas, any other economic data you might have on hand. And if you have one, please provide a copy of that end-use business plan. For instance, if you have a tenant that's interested in the property, they may have an end-use business plan. That's all helpful to help inform our decision. If you have not yet identified an end user, please discuss how they will be identified and the timelines or commitments from those possible end users. And then also providing the operating budget once the project is open also helps us get a good idea of that particular business's ability to thrive. So that's all helpful, relevant information for us. In terms of economic impact, please indicate the primary economic impact of the project, especially including new full-time and part-time jobs, new businesses, and the amount of private investment leveraged. These are all things that we check up on throughout the project and after completion. And we really like to have projects that we can say, hey, Newport News said they were going to do 10 jobs and they actually got 12 jobs. That's a big bonus in our book. Also describe the secondary impacts, such as sales tax, meals tax, lodging revenues, or any tourism revenues that may be coming in, as well as describing any access to services, resources, workforce development, and quality of life improvements. At the end of your application, there is a section for attachments. Here, you're going to have those local assurances where the chief administrative officer for your locality must sign and certify that the information is accurate and correct. Also, the governing body must authorize that the application has the specific property address and the dollar amount that you are requesting. If the locality is applying on behalf of a nonprofit, the resolution should document the specific match amounts and indicate that it's the responsibility of that entity to come up with the remaining match. You can also attach any extra photographs or any other items here that are pertinent to the project but weren't specifically requested. It's never a situation where too much info gets loaded up here. The more you can provide us just helps us give a better idea of kind of where the project stands in its level of success. The more information you can give us up front, the better we can know that this project can get underway and get moving quickly. And that was relatively quick. So if you have any questions or answers, now's the time to ask them and we can kick it back to Tori.
All right, thank you, Brandon. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask us any questions that you may have regarding the application or a specific question about a specific project that you may be working on an application. Buddy? Doesn't sound like anybody has anything, but again, please feel free to reach out to us. Brandon just put his email address in the chat. And we'll be happy to talk to you about any particular property project that you might be working on towards an application. Like you mentioned earlier, we did get some additional funding in the state budget this year for the port host program. So it increased from, previously it was $1.5 million per year. It is now $2.4 million for this year. So that is why the kind of the base request that you can make is up to $480,000 per locality. But you can also, if it's a larger project and there might be a need for additional funds, please include that as well. Because in case we don't get applications from all the localities, or if there's some money remaining, there may be some additional funds that may be available as well. But $1 million would be the maximum that you could potentially request for that. So we're looking forward to working with you on these projects. Like I said, we will have this information, the recording, as well as the kind of a PDF of the presentation available, as well as the updated fiscal year 25 grant guidelines and application manual should be up by the end of this week, and then you should be able to start submitting an application in CAM starting next Tuesday. So with that, if there are no last minute questions, go ahead and let you all get back to your day. I know you all are busy getting ready for the holiday weekend.